What do we do when life has no meaning? Should we give up or keep going? This is one of the many ideas explored within the works of Albert Camus. To him, this was the only question that mattered. If the universe is indifferent, if there is no higher purpose, then what stops us from walking away? But Camus didn't see this as a tragedy. He saw it as liberation. If life has no given meaning, then we are free to create our own. If nothing matters, then anything can. His answer was not despair, but defiance. This was Camus' rebellion against a world that offered no answers. But in order to explore this idea more meaningfully, we must first try to understand the mind itself. Albert Camus was one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. Born in 1913 in French Algeria, Camus emerged as a writer, dramatist, political activist, and, although he more than once denied it, a philosopher whose influence spanned far beyond the literary world. At the age of 44, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Camus grew up in a poor neighborhood, facing hardship from an early age. This shaped his lifelong interest in human suffering and the search for meaning. He married twice but had many extramarital affairs. He studied philosophy at the University of Algiers, where he began exploring the big question that would later define his philosophy. During World War II, as Nazi forces invaded France, Camus' personal journey took a radical turn. He joined the French resistance and became editor-in-chief of Combat, a secret newspaper fighting against the occupation. Politically, Camus was complicated. He opposed all forms of totalitarianism, including Stalinism, and supported a united Europe. Camus became deeply committed to finding joy in the simple pleasures of life. He described his philosophy as a lucid invitation to live and to create in the very midst of the desert. Though often linked to existentialism, Camus rejected the label. His philosophy was absurdism, the idea that humans search for meaning in a world that offers none. Camus was born in Mondovi. His family faced many hardships. Shortly after the outbreak of World War II, when Camus was less than a year old, his father, Lucien, was recalled to military service, where he died of shrapnel wounds at the First Battle of the Marne. As a child, the only thing Camus ever learned about his father was that he had once become violently ill after witnessing a public execution. His mother, Catherine, who was illiterate, partially deaf, and afflicted with speech pathology, worked in an ammunition factory and cleaned homes to help support the family. Growing up in the poor Belcourt district, Camus was no stranger to adversity. He and his mother lived with little in the way of material possessions, and though he was a French citizen, he didn't have the same privileges as those in France. This feeling of being an outsider would later appear in his work. Camus' heritage was pied noir, a term for French and European settlers. His grandfather moved to Algeria in the early 19th century in search of a better life. Despite his struggles, Camus found joy in football and swimming. He played as a goalkeeper for the junior local Algiers team. The sense of team spirit, fraternity, and common purpose appealed to Camus enormously. When he was asked in the 1950s by a sports magazine for a few words regarding his time with football, he said, "After many years during which I saw many things, what I know most surely about morality and the duty of man, I owe to sport." His life changed when a teacher, Louis Germain, noticed his lively intelligence and his desire to learn. In middle school, he gave Camus free lessons to prepare him for the 1924 scholarship despite his grandmother's plan for him to be a manual worker so that he could immediately contribute to the maintenance of the family. Camus maintained great gratitude and affection towards Louis Germain throughout his life. Years later, when Camus won the Nobel Prize, he dedicated his speech to his teacher, saying he owed everything to him. After receiving the news about winning the prize, he wrote, "But when I heard the news, my first thought, after my mother, was of you. Without you, without the affectionate hand you extended to the small poor child that I was, without your teaching and example, none of all this would have happened." At the age of 17, Camus was diagnosed with tuberculosis. This deeply affected him and his family. He had to leave home and stay with his uncle, Gustave. It was during this time that he became interested in philosophy. Under the mentorship of Jean Grenier, his philosophy teacher, Camus was introduced to the works of ancient Greek philosophers and the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche. Although his health was fragile, he still studied part-time and worked various jobs, including tutoring and working at the Meteorological Institute. In 1933, Camus went to the University of Algiers, where he completed his bachelor's degree in philosophy with a thesis on the ancient philosopher Plotinus. His academic interests deepened, and he studied not only early Christian thinkers, but also the works of Arthur Schopenhauer and the great novelists like Stendhal, Herman Melville, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and Franz Kafka. As Camus grew, so did his understanding of life's complexities. These early years would shape his views on human relationships, trust, and the challenges of facing an indifferent world. In 1934, Camus married Simone Hiet, hoping to help her overcome her morphine addiction. However, he later discovered she was involved with her doctor, leading to their divorce. This painful experience shaped his views on human relationships and trust. He once said, "Nobody realizes that some people expend tremendous energy merely to be normal." In 1935, Camus joined the French Communist Party, aiming to fight the deep inequalities between European settlers and native Algerians. Though not a Marxist, he saw communism as a way to address societal problems. However, his time with the Communist Party was brief. By 1938, as fascism spread across Europe, Camus became a strong anti-fascist. During this period, he nearly completed his first cycle of works, which included The Stranger, The Myth of Sisyphus, and the play Caligula. These works marked a pivotal moment in his intellectual journey, exploring the absurd and the meaninglessness of existence. When World War II began, Camus' life changed dramatically. He tried to enlist in the army, but was rejected due to his tuberculosis. As German forces advanced, he fled to Paris, where he soon lost his job at Paris Soir. In December 1940, he married Francine Faure, a pianist and mathematician. The couple briefly moved to Algeria, where Camus worked as a teacher, but his health forced him to seek a better climate in the French Alps. There, in the mountains, he began writing his next works, focused on the theme of revolt. These included his novel, The Plague, and the play The Misunderstanding, both of which would continue to explore the existential themes of suffering, resistance, and the human spirit. By 1943, Camus gained immense recognition and returned to Paris, where he expanded his intellectual circle. He met Jean-Paul Sartre, with whom he developed a complicated but mutually influential relationship. Camus found himself drawn into a wider circle of intellectuals, including Simone de Beauvoir and André Breton. Among them was Maria Casares, an actress with whom he had an affair. Despite his personal turmoil, he became an increasingly visible figure within the French intellectual landscape. Camus worked as a journalist and editor for Combat, an underground newspaper that resisted Nazi occupation. Writing under a pseudonym and false identification to protect himself, he wrote powerful editorials calling for freedom and the fight against fascism. His powerful writing reached the hearts of many in the occupied country, serving both as a rallying cry and a moral compass. Through his activism and writing, Camus cemented his place as both a leading figure in the resistance and a defining voice in existentialism. After the war, Camus entered a new chapter of his life. He settled in Paris with his wife, Francine. The couple had twins, Catherine and Jean. By this time, Camus was a well-known writer and intellectual, recognized not only for his literary works, but also for his crucial role in the French resistance. His growing reputation took him across the world, giving lectures at various universities in the United States and Latin America. During this time, Camus completed his second major cycle of work. His book, The Rebel, criticized totalitarian communism in all its forms and advocated for libertarian socialism and anarcho-syndicalism. His rejection of communism caused a final rift between him and Sartre, further distancing him from the Marxist left. Camus separated his work into 3 cycles. Each cycle consisted of a novel, an essay, and a play. This structure not only helped define his intellectual trajectory, but also reinforced the interwoven nature of his literary and philosophical exploration. Camus' personal life was as tumultuous as his professional one. He had numerous affairs, the most publicized of which was with Maria Casares. The strain on his marriage took a toll on Francine, who suffered a mental breakdown in the early 1950s, eventually requiring hospitalization. Overcome with guilt, Camus withdrew from public life for a time, sinking into depression. Despite his personal turmoil, 1957 brought Camus one of the greatest honors of his life, the Nobel Prize in Literature. At 44, he became the second youngest recipient of the award after Kipling. The award was a surprise, even to him, as he hadn't expected to be chosen over other contenders. Camus used the prize money to fund his work on his autobiography, The First Man, a reflective attempt to understand the moral lessons of his life. He also returned to the theater, directing a stage adaptation of Dostoevsky's Demons. The play opened in 1959 and was a great success. One of the figures who profoundly influenced Camus was the philosopher Simone Weil. He deeply admired her ideas and saw her writings as an antidote to nihilism, calling her the only great spirit of our times. After her death, he helped publish her work, further shaping his intellectual and moral outlook. Weil's emphasis on suffering, moral duty, and the human struggle against meaninglessness resonated deeply with Camus, ideas that would soon take center stage in his own philosophy. For Camus, philosophy was never just an abstract exercise, it was a confrontation. He believed that if life had no inherent meaning, then the only real question left to ask was, why live at all? Camus did not seek comfort in illusions. He refused to believe in divine plans or a higher purpose. He faced reality as it was, silent, indifferent, and sometimes even without meaning. But to him, this wasn't cause for despair. It was the foundation of true freedom. If life has no set purpose, then we are not bound by fate or doctrine. We are free to create meaning for ourselves. This became the heart of his philosophy. The absurd, as Camus described it, is the clash between our own desire for meaning and the universe's silence. We search for order, reason, and purpose, but the world offers none. Religion tries to provide answers, but to Camus, these were comforting illusions, lies we tell ourselves to avoid facing the truth. Some, unable to bear this weight, end their lives. Others escape into ideology, trying to force meaning onto a meaningless world. But Camus rejected both paths. If the universe offers no answers, then we must live without them. If life has no set purpose, then we are free to create our own. To Camus, this wasn't a tragedy, it was a release. He called it rebellion, not against society or power, but against the absurd itself. To live, to fight, to love, to create, to persist, despite the lack of meaning. His philosophy wasn't a cure for meaninglessness. It was a way to live with it, a way to move forward without false hope or despair. To him, this was the only question that mattered. And his answer was clear: we go on. Camus' life was tragically cut short on January 4, 1960, at the age of 46, when he died in a car accident. He had spent the New Year's holiday at his home in Lourmarin with his family and his publisher, Michel Gallimard. After the holiday, Camus' wife and children took the train back to Paris, but Camus chose to return with Gallimard in his luxury car. On the long straight stretch of route, the car collided with a tree. Camus, seated in the passenger seat, died instantly. Gallimard, who was driving, succumbed to his injuries 5 days later. The two people who were also in the car survived unharmed. In the wreckage, 144 pages of a handwritten manuscript titled The First Man were found. Camus had believed that this unfinished novel, based on his childhood in Algeria, would be his greatest work. He was buried in the Lourmarin cemetery, where he had spent his final years. At his funeral, Jean-Paul Sartre delivered a eulogy, praising Camus for his stubborn humanism. Later in life, Camus would come to emphasize the importance of solitude and personal reflection as part of navigating the human experience. He once said, "Find meaning, distinguish melancholy from sadness, go out for a walk. It doesn't have to be a romantic walk in the park. Spring at its most spectacular moment, flowers and smells, and outstanding poetical imagery smoothly transferring you into another world. It doesn't have to be a walk during which you'll have multiple life epiphanies and discover meanings no other brain ever managed to encounter. Do not be afraid of spending quality time by yourself. Find meaning or don't find meaning, but steal some time and give it freely and exclusively to your own self. Opt for privacy and solitude. That doesn't make you antisocial or cause you to reject the rest of the world, but you need to breathe and you need to be."